be seated. So before we begin, I just want to let you all know that our ballots are on our phones. So if you see us tweaking around on our phones, it's not because we're not paying attention. So just wanted to give everybody the heads up. And we can go ahead and call the case of United States versus Augie Shepard. Can I get appearances from the parties?
Yes, Your Honor. My name is Elizabeth Baldwin, and I represent the state in today's case.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Marra Edwards, and today with my counsel, Lillian Mayer.
Good morning, Your Honor.
We represent the defendant, Mr. Augie Shepard.
Do we have any housekeeping or motions to address?
Yes, Your Honor, just briefly, we've notified counsel of our intent as the state to offer 404B evidence on behalf of the defendant in today's case. And there's also a binder in front of you that contains the evidence in today's case, so when we're entering it, we'll just have you flip to it rather than bringing it up to you.
Sounds great. Anything else?
That's all, Your Honor.
Your Honor, I'd like to direct your attention to the pretrial order, stipulation number 8 on page 3. It says that the parties have waived any objection to exhibits number 3 through 6. That's the affidavit of Bellamy Dembski, the forensic report of Wyatt Mueller, and the expert report of Jesse Falkenstein. And at this time, we'd offer those 3 exhibits for admission.
Without objection, Your Honor, pursuant to the stipulation.
Then they're admitted.
We'd also like to ask your preference on approaching opposing counsel, the witness, and the bench.
You can approach opposing counsel. If you're approaching the adverse witness, please ask permission, and you can approach the bench freely.
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, the defense is ready to proceed to openings.
All right. Anything further before we begin?
No, Your Honor, we're ready to proceed to openings as well.
All right. Go ahead and see openings from the prosecution.
Your Honor, members of the jury. On June 25th, 2021, Tom Kline woke up. He kissed his wife goodbye, and he left for what he thought was going to be a normal day. But what he didn't know when he took the 20-minute drive from his home in Santa Monica to his Westwood travel agency was that just hours later, he would be predicting his own death. And 12 hours after that, Tom Kline would be found, just steps from the safety of his home, strangled. Members of the jury, Tom Kline lived in Los Angeles. Now, this is a place, a city full of stories, a place people come for a fresh start. And Tom Kline, when he came here, he was looking to start fresh too. But what he wasn't looking to do was stand out. In fact, Mr. Kline was looking to disappear. That's because he had a past that was following him. A past that he couldn't escape. And because of that, Tom Kline is dead today. Now, like a character in a mafia movie, Tom Kline, he was an illusion, a facade. He was a story made up to hide a man desperate to distance himself from the life he once knew. You see, Tom Kline's real name was Barry Capello, and he was a captain in the DeBruno crime family of Philadelphia. Now, at the head of that family sat the defendant, Augie Shepard. Members of the jury, Augie Shepard imposed upon his family the idea that they had something stronger than blood, something more sacred. This family had a code, an understanding that to be a member of the DeBruno family meant loyalty for life. But 4 years ago, Barry Capello committed the ultimate sin. He broke that code. He testified against his family to save his own skin, so he had to disappear. After securing the conviction of one of his own, Barry Capello was placed into witness protection, and he went to California to start a new life, a new job, in a city, a continent away from the one he came from. But members of the jury, you might be asking yourselves, why are we here? Today, Barry Capello is dead, but how did he die in the care of the most strict and secure civilian protection available? The answer, it's a coincidence. You see, the defendant, Augie Shepard, he wasn't just the head of a crime family. He was also a husband and a father of two. And in June of 2022, he took his daughter from Philadelphia to California to tour UCLA. They explored the area around campus, they had lunch, and then, like many visitors to Westwood, they decided to get ice cream at Saffron and Rose. But what no one could have predicted was that wedged between that restaurant and the ice cream shop was Kline travel. And in the seconds-long walk between lunch and dessert, Tom Kline turned back into Barry Capello, and he came face to face with the man he betrayed. You're going to hear a phone call today that he made just seconds after seeing the defendant, Augie Shepard. You're going to hear how scared he was. You're going to hear him say that he made eye contact with the defendant. You're going to hear just hours later, he was dead. Now, members of the jury, that's why we, as the state today, have charged the defendant with murder and retaliation against a witness. And we have to prove every element of that to you beyond a reasonable doubt. We will. You'll hear today that the defendant killed Barry Capello with malice aforethought. And what that means is that he intentionally and deliberately killed him. Members of the jury, you're going to see evidence today, forensic evidence, from the scene of the crime. You're going to hear testimony that this murder, it occurred between 12 a.m. and 1 a.m. on June 26th of 2021. You're also going to hear that at 12:30, a neighbor saw a man matching the defendant's description strangling Barry Capello to death in his driveway. And by the end of today's trial, you'll understand why. You're going to hear about the testimony Barry gave against the crime family. Not only did it lead to the incarceration of the defendant's favorite nephew, but he also pointed the finger at the defendant as the head of a family responsible for countless crimes. That's why we've also charged the defendant with retaliation against a witness, which just means that he was killed for his testimony. You're going to hear that it was so dangerous to testify against this family that the defendant had to be put into witness protection. So dangerous that not even witness protection could save him. Members of the jury, at the end of today's trial, all the facts will become clear to you. You'll see that Barry Capello, he saw it coming. He knew what was going to happen. He saw it coming, but he couldn't stop it. At the end of today's trial, that's why I'm going to ask you to find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. Opening from the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
While he slept, someone else stole. Members of the jury, Ms. Baldwin just got up here and told you that on June 25th, 2021, Tom Kline saw Augie Shepard and his daughter walking past his office. And we agree. We won't deny that today. But Tom Kline was worried about the wrong person. He thought he could see, but he was wrong. Members of the jury, you'll hear that on June 25th, 2021, when Mr. Kline got home from work, he parked his Chevy Impala right outside in the driveway. And someone saw it. They saw that the trunk was popped, and so they decided to steal. They started rummaging through that truck, but then they froze. Because a dog started barking, a front porch light came on, the doorknob started rattling, and at that moment, they had to grab something. Something that all of us probably have in our trunks right now. A pair of jumper cables. He grabbed those jumper cables, and like Ms. Baldwin said, you'll hear that one of Mr. Kline's neighbors actually watched him get strangled. while Augie Shepard slept, someone else stole. You're probably wondering, what was Augie Shepard doing in LA? You'll hear that he was doing something that most parents with kids that are juniors in high school, he was doing something that they all do, going on college tours. You're going to hear today that they flew out to California, rode up the Pacific Coast Highway, went to UC Berkeley, UC Santa Barbara, and finally to UCLA on June 25th, 2021. But what you won't hear from the government, what they'll try to ignore, is that while Augie Shepard slept, someone else stole. In fact, members of the jury, today you're going to hear about cell phone data that places Augie Shepard at his hotel room that night. And you won't see any camera footage that shows him leaving, because he was sleeping. Regardless of that fact, today the government has charged Mr. Augie Shepard with murder and retaliation against a witness. Now, that means that they have to prove that Augie Shepard killed Tom Kline and that he did it as an act of retaliation against testimony Mr. Kline gave back in 2018. But as the government, they can't just say that. They'll have to bring you evidence to prove it. To prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. The highest burden in our legal system. And members of the jury, what you'll find at the end of today's trial is that they won't be able to meet that burden. Because while Augie Shepard slept, someone else stole. Now, as a defense, we don't hold any type of burden in today's case. We don't have to call any witnesses or provide any evidence, but we will. Today you'll hear from Augie Shepard's daughter, Lori. And like Ms. Baldwin said, she'll tell you all about the trip. She'll tell you about June 25th, 2021. And she'll tell you that on the night of June 25th, all she saw from her father was that he slept. Members of the jury, on June 26, 2021, Tom Kline lost his life. He was murdered right in front of his home. And we agree, it's a tragedy. What I'm going to ask you to do throughout today's trial is to listen to the facts, not the feelings. To separate suspicion from proof. And when you do that, you'll find that when the government so swiftly pointed the finger to Mr. Shepard, they didn't have enough evidence to prove it. Which is why at the end of today's trial, I'll stand right back up here and remind you that while Augie Shepard slept, someone else stole. And I'll ask that you find Augie Shepard not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, is the government ready to call its first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The state calls Deputy Marshal Connor Wright to the stand. May we proceed?
You may.
Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Connor Wright.
How are you involved in this case today, Ms. Wright?
Well, I was tasked with investigating the death of Barry Capello after he was found dead outside his home last year in June.
Can you tell us who Barry Capello is?
Sure. Barry Capello was a man who was placed into witness protection a few years ago after he testified in a trial against some high-profile people in the mafia.
Were you involved in that witness protection situation?
Yes, I was. I'm a deputy marshal, and as part of my job, I place different people like Mr. Capello in witness protection programs to make sure that they're safe after testimony like that.
Now, you mentioned that he gave some testimony. Would you recognize that testimony if it was shown to you today?
Sure.
Could you please open your binder and, Your Honor, as well, to Exhibit 7?
Okay. Just give me a moment. All right, I believe I'm there.
Is that the testimony that Mr. Capello gave against the Bruno crime family?
Yes, from October 26, 2018.
Does it look the same as when you last saw it?
Yeah, looks like it.
Your Honor, we move to enter Exhibit 7.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, to more prejudicial than probative. May I be heard?
You may.
In document, there are specific statements that point to Augie Shepard being a part of some organized crime organization. Whether or not he was, and whether or not Mr. Capello testified to that effect, that testimony that he was a part of the mob shows substantially more prejudice than any probative effect. Surely the jury is going to be influenced by this testimony about organized crime. Ms. Baldwin can offer any testimony about the fact that Barry Capello testified without offering the testimony in its entirety.
Your Honor, may I be heard on that?
You may.
Your Honor, it's absolutely more probative than it is prejudicial for this witness to talk about this testimony and for the jury to receive it. One thing that we have to prove in today's trial today is that this was retaliation against a witness. It's important for the jury to hear the exact testimony Mr. Capello gave against Augie Shepard specifically and against his nephew to make the decision whether that was accurate. Your Honor?
May I be heard on that?
You may.
Ms. Baldwin can offer testimony that this was active retaliation without offering that testimony with the organized crime information. The person that Mr. Capello was testifying against was Mr. Shepard's nephew. That alone is enough information to show retaliation. Ms. Baldwin doesn't have to elicit the testimony about any sort of organized crime. Just simply saying that he testified against Mr. Shepard and against Mr. Shepard's nephew is surely enough information to show that there was retaliation.
On the 403 grounds, I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, are you aware of any testimony given by Barry Capello against Mr. Shepard specifically?
Yes, I am. If you look at this transcript right here, Mr. Capello names a few people in the DeBruno crime family, that's the mafia, and he names that the boss is Augie Shepard.
Now, when Mr. Capello was put into witness protection, how often did you talk to him?
I talked to him every few weeks, to check in, make sure that everything was going all right with his relocation.
And what was involved in that relocation? Where did he work?
Sure. So we moved him across the country from Philadelphia to LA, set him up at a travel agency, and gave him a new name, Tom Kline. He worked at Kline Travel Agency after that.
Now, did you ever have any evidence that anybody had found out about Tom Kline's identity?
No, not for a few years. He was there starting in 2018, but in June of 2021 last year, I did get a phone call from him that he believed someone did find him.
And what did he say to you in that phone call?
He said that Augie Shepard just walked past his store, that Mr. Shepard had found him.
Would you recognize a transcript of that phone call if I were to show it to you today in court?
I'm sure I would.
Permission for the witness to turn to Exhibit 14, in Your Honor as well.
Sure.
Well, just so Your Honor knows, there's also an audio exhibit of this exhibit that we have ready to play.
Okay.
It's the same wording. Now, does this look like the transcript of the phone call you received?
Yes, it does.
Does this feel fair and accurate to when you last saw it?
Yeah.
Has it been changed at all?
No, I don't believe so.
And we now move Exhibit 14 into evidence.
Objection to hearsay.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. Under Rule 803.2, this is actually an excited utterance by Mr. Capello. It's clear from this phone call that he had just seen the man who he thought was going to kill him, and he was on the phone right after. He's in an excited state in this phone call, so it falls under 803.2 as an excited utterance, Your Honor.
Response?
Your Honor, I don't believe that foundation has been laid, that an exciting or startling event or condition has occurred, and that the statement was given while it was occurring. The statement, there's not enough foundation on the record that it is under Rule 803.2 an excited utterance.
Yeah, can we have the witness lay some more foundation as to the excited state? Until then, I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, when you received that phone call from Mr. Capello, how did he sound to you?
Well, he sounded a little freaked out. I mean, he said, "Call me when you get this." That he wanted to talk to me right away.
And in that phone call, did he indicate how soon after seeing Mr. Shepard he called you?
Yeah, he said Augie Shepard just walked by my office.
Your Honor, we move Exhibit 14 into evidence.
No objection at this time, Your Honor.
Then it's so moved.
Your Honor, we'll now be playing Exhibit 13, which is Exhibit 14's actual recording of that phone call.
Any
May that be
objection?
admitted as well?
Any objection?
No objection to that.
Do you want to move the audio in as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objection to moving it in?
No objection, Your Honor.
Then it's admitted and you may play it.
Call me when you get this. I think they found me. Augie Shepard just walked by my office window. We made eye contact.
Now, in the moments after receiving this call, what did you do?
Well, I tried to get in touch with Augie Shepard, with Mr. Capello, and figure out what exactly was going on.
And when was the next time you saw Mr. Capello?
The next time I saw him was that night, when he was found dead in his driveway.
Now, did you have any evidence that Mr. Shepard was ever near Kline Travel?
Well, yes, I did. I mean, there was this phone call that said he was just walking right past it. And then I also found receipts and a map showing that he was in LA on that day he died, June 25th.
Your Honor, we have exhibits 11, 12, 15, 16, and 21. Per stipulation 11, some of these are pre-admitted as regularly conducted business documents. And that's exhibit 11, 12, 15, and 16. And per stipulation, exhibit 21 is a fair and accurate copy of the area around Kline Travel.
Okay, let's take those one at a time.
Yes.
What's the first exhibit?
So exhibit 11,
Okay, and do you have any objection to the admission of exhibit 11?
No, Your Honor, per pretrial ruling number 11, no objection.
Okay, so we'll move that one. What's your next one?
exhibit 12, it's a receipt from the UCLA guest house where Mr. Shepard was staying.
Per that same pretrial ruling, no objection.
Okay.
Exhibit 15 is a receipt, also a record of regularly conducted business from a restaurant near Kline Travel.
Okay, and any objection to that?
No objection.
And exhibit 16 is a receipt from an ice cream place on the other side of Kline Travel.
No objection.
Exhibit 21 is a map of the area around Kline Travel where all these businesses were located.
Any objection to the map?
Pursuant to 13, stipulation number 13, excuse me, no objection.
Okay, then we'll go ahead and move all of those exhibits in at this time.
Yes, Your Honor. May I tender these to the jury?
You may.
Now, what did you learn from all of these documents?
Right. From these documents, I found out that Mr. Shepard had been in LA because he was going on a college tour with his daughter, that they went to various restaurants and shops right around the area of where Kline Travel was located.
Could you turn to exhibit 21?
Sure, just give me a moment. Okay, I'm there.
Now, where is Kline Travel located in reference to the 2 restaurant receipts that you also looked at?
Well, I looked at 2 receipts of the restaurants where they were. One was this ice cream place in the top to the right here, and one was this Italian restaurant down here. Kline Travel was right in between the 2 of them.
Thank you. Now, did you review anything in your investigation into Mr. Capello's death?
Yes, I did. After we found him on the driveway, there was an autopsy report conducted as well as a forensic report too.
Could you turn to exhibits 4 and 5? Your Honor, we admitted these before trial today.
Thank you.
May I tender to the jury?
Yes, you may.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm here now.
Can you tell us what you learned from the forensic analysis of the crime scene around Mr. Capello's body?
Yes, I found that Mr. Capello had been strangled. There were a pair of jumper cables right on the scene, and there was bruising on Mr. Capello, and there was DNA on the jumper cables.
Would you recognize those jumper cables if I were to show them to you?
I would.
Your Honor, I'm approaching the witness with the jumper cables. And do these look like the jumper cables that you saw near Mr. Capello's body?
Yes, they do.
They seem fair and accurate.
Yes.
Have they been changed or altered in any way since you last saw them?
No, this is how I remember them.
Your Honor, we now move to enter these jumper cables into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
They'll be admitted.
Now, in the forensic report, did you find anything about how these jumper cables were related to Barry Capello's death?
Yes, I did. I found that he had been strangled with them, that his DNA was all over it. And I also found evidence that these jumper cables were connected to Augie Shepard.
May I approach and tender to the jury?
Let's keep those on counsel table. I
Yes,
don't
Your
want to be passing physical evidence around the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, can you tell us about that evidence you found connecting those jumper cables to Mr. Shepard?
Sure. So I found that while Mr. Shepard was staying in LA, he had been driving around with a rental car, and that there were jumper cables missing from the rental car that Mr. Shepard had been using that matched those exactly.
Could you turn to Exhibit 10?
I'm there.
Could you tell us what that is?
This is a letter that I got from that rental car agency concerning Mr. Shepard's vehicle.
Does it look fair and accurate to when you last saw it?
Yes, it does.
Has it been changed at all?
No.
Your Honor, we now move Exhibit 10 into evidence.
Any objection?
Pursuant to stipulation 11, no objection.
It'll be admitted.
May I send it to the jury?
You may.
And what kind of car was the defendant driving according to this document?
It says that he was driving a green sports vehicle.
And did you ever find any evidence that anyone had seen a sports vehicle outside of Mr. Capello's home?
Yes, I did. We talked to his next-door neighbor, and he said that he saw a sports car just like that pull up in his driveway around the time of death.
Would you recognize that testimony if you were to see it today?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, we've actually pre-admitted Exhibit 3 before trial, okay? Or we admitted it here in trial.
Okay.
May I approach in time,
You may.
Now, what did Mr. Dembski say he saw on the night in question?
Sure, Mr. Dembski, the neighbor, said he saw a man exit the sports car with a pair of jumper cables, sneak up behind Mr. Capello, and then strangle him.
Thank you, Deputy Wright. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Deputy Wright, you would agree that it's your job to make people disappear.
That's one way to put it. Yeah, I will work in witness protection.
Right, you work for the U.S. Marshal Office,
Yes.
and like you said, in witness protection.
Yes, that's my job.
Your job is to give people new jobs, actually.
That's right. As part of my job, we relocate people across the country to areas where they're safe from those they testified against in trials or other circumstances.
Right, and you give them new homes when you do that.
Yes, we do.
You give them new names.
Yep. We give them new names, a new line of work, everything to change their identity.
And you've done this for over 20 people.
I have.
You'd agree that you're good at your job.
Yes, I'm very proud of it.
And in fact, you did this for Barry Capello, right?
That's right. We gave him the name Tom Kline.
Right. And Tom Kline? Well, his name was not in any public records, was it?
No, of course not.
His business wasn't in his name?
Well, it was in the name Kline Travel Agency. That was his new name.
Right, but on any public record, he wasn't listed as the owner of that business, was he?
Not under the name Barry Capello. That's right.
Or Tom Kline?
Yes, that's right.
His name wasn't listed under his house, was it?
No,
Your job is to make people impossible to find, right?
that's certainly what we try to do.
Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about what you talked to on direct with Miss Baldwin. You mentioned something about Bellamy Dembski, excuse me, right?
Yes, that was Mr. Capello's next-door neighbor, the man who witnessed the whole affair.
Well, I want to talk to you a little bit more about that. You would agree that Mr. Kline's neighborhood wasn't the safest in LA, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Leading up to June 2021, there were some burglaries.
Yes, there were some.
And to your knowledge, those burglars were never caught.
Well, I don't work with the police in LA, but as far as I know.
Right, so that's a yes to my question. They were never caught.
I can't say for sure.
I want to talk to you about what Mr. Dembski said that he saw.
Okay.
He said he saw Mr. Kline's Chevy Impala parked outside, right?
That's right.
The trunk was popped open.
Yes,
And then he saw someone in all black come out, right?
that's right.
Then a porch light came on,
Right, there was the porch light, the street lamps were there, yeah.
and Mr. Kline came out.
Yes, he did.
And then he was strangled.
Yes, he was with those jumper cables.
Now, Mr. Dembski wasn't able to identify this person, was he?
Not quite. He said that the person was 5'11", about 180 pounds. He believed he was white.
Right. But he wasn't able to give you any names.
No, he wasn't.
Now, you just mentioned jumper cables, and I want to talk to you a little bit about those. Are these the jumper cables that you found
Yeah.
at Mr. Kline's residence?
Yes, those are.
Well, I want to talk about exactly what you found on these jumper cables. Now, these jumper cables are pretty generic, you'd agree, right?
Yeah, they look like jumper cables.
The brand is Nylite.
Yes.
If we went to Walmart, we could find them.
Yeah, you could.
If we got on our phones and went on Amazon, we could find them.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
And like you mentioned, the car rental company that Mr. Shepard was using had them.
Yes, those were the ones that were in the vehicle Mr. Shepard rented.
You said they were missing, right?
As far as I know, that's what the travel agency told me.
I want to talk to you more about what the travel agency told you. If you could go to Exhibit 10.
Okay. Just give me a moment. Okay, I'm there.
And if you could read silently as I read aloud. Upon receiving your subpoena, we checked the vehicle and discovered the jumper cables were missing, right?
Right.
We cannot ascertain when or during whose rental they were missing, right?
Yeah, that's what they said.
When we began renting this vehicle in January 2021, it has been rented to 18 individuals in that time. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what they told me in this letter.
Now, on those jumper cables, you collected evidence, right?
That's right, DNA evidence from Mr. Capello.
And you only found evidence of Mr. Capello, is that right?
The DNA evidence, sure, but the jumper cables were linked to Mr. Shepard's vehicle.
Well, there's no fingerprints on these jumper cables, are there?
No, we weren't able to find any.
And like the rental company told you, they don't know when those jumper cables went missing.
No, they didn't have a specific time.
So you were able to connect Mr. Shepard to those jumper cables without a specific time from when they were taken.
Well, that's not quite right. We know that sometime after Mr. Shepard rented that vehicle, the rental agency found that those jumper cables weren't there, and the car that night, it also matched the same type of car that Mr. Shepard had rented.
But Deputy Wright, you'd agree that 18 individuals had that car since January 2021.
Yes.
And they tell you that they cannot ascertain when those jumper cables went missing.
Right, they're not sure about the exact time range.
Now I want to talk to you about some phone records that you reviewed. Now you reviewed those, correct?
Phone records for...
For Mr. Shepard.
Yes, I did.
In those phone records, you found where Mr. Shepard was on June 25th, 2021, right?
I found where his cell phone was.
Right. Based off the evidence that you reviewed, the cell phone places Mr. Shepard at the guest house that night, right?
Objection, Your Honor, to a lack of foundation. May I be heard?
You may.
This witness can only testify that that's where Mr. Shepard's phone was. She doesn't have the foundation to say whether or not he had the phone on his person, so that's exactly where he was. That's not information that this witness can give us.
I can rephrase, Your Honor.
Sure. And the witness is free to clarify what she can and can't ascertain.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. So you reviewed Mr. Shepard's phone records.
Yes, I did.
The phone records show that Mr. Shepard's phone was at the UCLA guest house on the night of the 25th, right?
That's right.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Deputy Wright, did you find anything stolen from the vehicle of Barry Capello?
No, I didn't.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anything further from this witness, or may she step down?
No recross, Your Honor.
Okay. You may be excused. Thank you. Anything further from the state? Or the government, my apologies.
No, Your Honor, we rest our case in chief.
All right. Do any of my jurors need a recess, or can we keep on going? Awesome. Defense, you may call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Lauren Shepard to stand.
I'm so sorry. My first time in court. I'm so sorry.
May I proceed?
You may.
Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hi, my name is Lauren.
Well, Lauren, what do you do for a living?
I don't have a job. I'm actually going to college next year.
Well, could you tell us why you're here in court today?
Yeah, this is my dad's trial, and I was with him the weekend in question.
Well, we'll get to that in just a moment, but Ms. Shepard, I want to be clear. What do you know about what your dad does for a living?
Honestly, not much. I really regret not spending more time getting to know him now that I'm leaving, but we never really talked about his work. We weren't that close.
Ms. Shepard, to your knowledge, is your father a part of organized crime?
No.
Well, I want to go back to that weekend that you just mentioned. Could you tell us a little bit more about it? What were you doing?
Yeah, so my dad was actually taking me on some college trips. We were gone for pretty much a whole week. We went up and down California, to Cal, to UCSB, to UCLA. It was a lot of fun when my dad wasn't asking embarrassing questions during the college tours, but it was fun and tiring.
Could you tell us what day you went to UCLA?
Yeah, that was the 25th of June.
And how long did you stay there?
We got there at 10 a.m. on the 25th and then left the next morning.
All right, well, let's walk through that day. How did you start it?
So we drove down from Santa Barbara, got to LA, and then we got to the hotel, checked in, went to lunch, did a college tour, back to the hotel, then to dinner. We had a busy day.
Well, where did you go to lunch?
It was this place called Pomodoro, I think. It was in LA.
All right, did you get any dessert after lunch?
Yeah, we got some ice cream.
Okay. When you were going to get ice cream, how far away was it from that place that you went to lunch?
It was super close. It was just 2 doors down.
Do you remember passing Kline Travel Agency on your way to dessert?
Yes, I do.
Well, when you passed, did your father stop?
No, we just went straight to the ice cream.
Well, did he look inside?
No, he didn't.
At any point during this trip, did your father tell you that he recognized someone?
No, I don't think we saw anyone we knew.
Well, what was his demeanor like after passing?
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation. May I be heard?
You may.
This witness can testify to whether or not she saw anybody that she knew, but she can't speculate into the mindset of her father whether or not he saw anyone he knew.
Response?
Your Honor, this is rationally based on the witness's perception. She just testified that she was with her father on this college tour. They spent the day together. I asked her specifically if he told her that he saw anyone he knew. And she said, no. This is rationally based on her perception. It's not speculation.
May I be heard?
You may.
The question wasn't whether or not her father told her he saw anybody he knew. It was whether or not either of them saw anyone that they knew. And she can't speculate into the mindset of Augie Shepard whether or not he turned his head and saw Tom Kline in that building. She can't know that, so she can only testify to what she knows, for sure.
I think what the witness testified to is that she wasn't sure and that she didn't think so. And with the foundation laid, I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Ms. Shepard, I'll ask you again. To your knowledge, did your father see anyone that he knew?
No.
Well, did his demeanor change after walking past Kline Travel Agency?
No, he was pretty much the same the whole day, just really low energy.
Well, what did you do after going to lunch?
That's when we went on the tour at UCLA.
Do you remember how long that tour was?
It was pretty long, about 4 hours.
And were you riding on a golf cart, or how were you getting around UCLA?
I wish we had a golf cart. We were just walking.
All right, well, after you did that tour, where did you go next?
Then we went back to the hotel for a bit before dinner.
What time did you get back from dinner?
Oh gosh, I think it was around 10:30 p.m.
And at that point, what did you do?
I actually had a friend at UCLA who was a year above me, and I went out to a party with her.
Now, Ms. Shepard, you just mentioned that you went out to a party. Is that, have you ever given any testimony that you didn't go out?
Yes. When I was questioned initially, I was trying to hide it from my parents. They didn't know that I ever went to parties, and so I wasn't honest about it until they showed me some evidence and they caught me. It was a stupid mistake, but yes, to your question.
When did you get back from this party?
Around 3 a.m.
What was your father doing when you got back?
He was asleep.
Thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Shepard, you knew Barry Capello, right?
That's right. He was my uncle.
That's right. You say he was your uncle. He was really an employee of your father, right?
That's my understanding. I didn't know much about my dad's work, but he was a good family friend.
You knew he was an employee of your father's, right?
That's what I assumed, yes.
And you were so close that you called him uncle, right?
That's right.
Your parents referred to him as uncle, right?
Yes.
He came to all of your family holidays, didn't he?
Yeah, I was really close with Uncle Barry.
But then, about 4 years ago, you didn't see Uncle Barry as much anymore, did you?
No, he left.
You didn't see him at all, right?
That's right.
And you know he left because he testified against your father, right?
Yeah, that's what my dad told me.
That's right. Your dad told you that he had betrayed your family, right?
That's right.
He called your Uncle Barry a rat, right?
He did.
He said he didn't even want to hear his name mentioned again, right?
That's right.
Now, I want to talk about the trip to LA that you were just talking about. You told us that you passed Kline Travel, right?
Yes.
Now, as you were passing Kline Travel, you can't tell us whether your father looked through the door briefly, can you?
I didn't see him do that.
But you can't tell us whether, if you were looking away, he looked through that door, right?
No, not in that chance.
You can't tell us exactly what your father did see that day, can you?
No, I can't.
Let's talk about what you saw that night. Now, you mentioned to us earlier that you had gone to a party, right?
I did.
Would you recognize some text messages from that night if I were to show them to you?
Yeah, I think so.
If you could turn to Exhibit 20 in your binder.
Okay.
These are text messages that you sent to your friend Jackie, right?
That's right. She was the friend I had at UCLA.
Do they look fair and accurate as to when you last saw them?
Yeah, it looks the same.
We now move Exhibit 20 into evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, to hearsay.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. We really want to use these for the timestamps on these messages, namely 11:18. We're fine with redacting any of the statements.
Your Honor, with that stipulation that we redact all of the statements, we don't have any objection.
So just to clarify, we are entering the name of the recipient or just that there were text messages on June 25th?
That she received a text message on 11:18 on Friday, June 25th, right? Yes, Your Honor.
And we're comfortable with that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, we can admit it redacted.
May I present this redacted, constructively redacted copy?
You may.
Now, at 11:18, you received a text from your friend, right?
Yes.
And you told us that you went with that friend to a party, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And you didn't get back from that party until about 3 a.m., isn't that right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
So from 11:18 to 3 a.m., you don't know what your father was doing, do you?
I wasn't with him, but he was sleeping when I left, sleeping when I came back.
Right, but I want to talk about that middle portion. And in that middle portion between 11:18 and 3 a.m., that almost 4-hour period, you don't know where your father was, right?
No, I can't be sure.
If he left the hotel, you wouldn't know, right?
No.
Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Shepard, Ms. Baldwin just asked you about what your father saw on June 25th. I want to talk about what you saw. When you walked past Kline Travel Agency, did you see your Uncle Barry?
No, I didn't.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right.
No recross, Your Honor. We just asked that you be able to step down.
Sure. You may step down.
Thanks.
Anything further from the defense before you close your case?
No, Your Honor. At this point, we close our case to you.
All right. Any break needed, or shall we proceed? All right. Closing argument from the government.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, members of the jury, he saw it coming, but he couldn't stop it. That's what you heard today about the tragic case of Mr. Barry Capella. He saw Augie Shepard outside of his travel agency that day, and he knew. He was scared. He knew something bad was going to happen to him. Members of the jury, he saw it coming. You heard that phone call today that he made just seconds after seeing Augie Shepard. He said, "I think they found me. Please call me as soon as you can." Members of the jury, he made that call at 12:50. And by midnight that night, he was dead. Strangled. You heard today that he was strangled with jumper cables. It's not a coincidence that jumper cables of this same make and model were missing from the defendant's rental car. A rental car that fits the description of the one rented by the defendant. Members of the jury, it's right in front of us. I can see it coming just like Barry did, and I hope you can too. Members of the jury, all of the evidence points to one person, Augie Shepard. Nobody knows where Mr. Shepard was between the hours of 11:18 and 3 a.m. But we know that a man fitting his exact description was seen outside Tom Kline's house, outside Barry Capello's house, strangling him to death. Members of the jury, the defense wants you to believe that something was stolen from Tom Kline, but the only thing that was stolen was his life. And why? It's because he testified against the defendant. He broke that sacred code of the De Bruno family. He chose himself over them. And after all those years, Augie Shepard couldn't forget it. The defendant never forgot. And when he saw Barry Capello that day, he got his chance. A chance he'd been waiting 4 years for. To kill this rat. To kill this person whose name he never even wanted to hear again in his life. Members of the jury, the malice the defendant had for Barry Capello, it's clear. It's clear from the testimony of his daughter. And it's clear from all the evidence we saw in trial today. You heard how angry he was that Mr. Capello had betrayed the family. His testimony. Members of the jury, if he killed Barry Capello because of his testimony, that's retaliation against a witness. And that's one of the things we had to prove to you today, members of the jury, and we did. But we also had to prove something a little bit more simple. That he murdered Barry Capello. That the defendant killed him with malice aforethought, that he did it deliberately and intentionally. But members of the jury, how much more deliberate, how much more intentional, how much more personal could it be than up-close strangling someone? This was a revenge killing, members of the jury. It was a retaliation. And it was a cold-blooded murder. Find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. Closing from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. While Augie Shepard slept, someone else stole. Members of the jury, I want to make something abundantly clear. On June 25th, 2021, Augie Shepard was exhausted. You heard today that on the week of June 25th, he had been going on tours with his daughter of different colleges. He flew from Philadelphia, then went to Oakland and UC Santa Barbara, all the way to LA, all along the way taking walking tours on big campuses. He was exhausted. College dorm after college dorm, hotel room after hotel room. On June 25th, 2021, Mr. Shepard was just trying to put one foot in front of the other. He wasn't looking into a travel agency, trying to settle some score. While Augie Shepard slept, someone else stole. And members of the jury, the sad truth in today's case is exactly what Ms. Baldwin said. Tom Kline couldn't see it coming because he was worried about the wrong person. You heard that day that Mr. Kline parked his Chevy Impala outside of his car, outside of his driveway. It's a nice car. Someone walked up to it, saw that the trunk was popped, and whether or not they stole anything, they intended to. Because we heard that there was a string of burglaries going on in Mr. Kline's neighborhood, with no one ever caught for those crimes. So he looked around, tried to find something, and then he was stopped. Because a dog was barking, a light turned on, doors started rattling, and out comes Mr. Kline. So the burglar has to think fast. He has to grab something that we all have, something that you can find at a store. These jumper cables. He grabs them, strangles him. What was supposed to be a quick crime, grab and go, turned into a murder. And Mr. Kline was the victim. While Augie Shepard slept, someone else stole. And that's why we're here today, members of the jury, because the government has charged Mr. Shepard with murder and retaliation against a witness. That means that they have to prove that Mr. Shepard killed Tom Kline, that he intended to kill Tom Kline, and that he did it in retaliation for testimony he gave back in 2018. And members of the jury, they have to prove this to you beyond a reasonable doubt, which means that the only reasonable explanation for what happened to Mr. Kline has to be that Mr. Shepard killed him. But members of the jury, we know that while Augie Shepard slept, someone else stole. But let's take the government's case step by step, see what they proved and see what they did. Now, members of the jury, we all agree that on June 25th, 2021, Mr. Shepard walked past Kline Travel Agency. But you heard from Lauren Shepard. When he walked past, that's all he did. Walk past. He didn't stop. He didn't look in. He didn't say, "That's Barry Capello." His demeanor didn't change. Nothing. The government is trying to tell you that Augie Shepard, filled with hate, filled with revenge, killed Tom Kline, but when he walked past him, he couldn't so much as stop. Nothing. That's not reasonable. But there's another problem with the government story. Because Tom Kline, as we all know, was in witness protection. And like the U.S. Marshal told you, she's good at her job. Her job is to make people impossible to find, and when the government wants to, they do it pretty well. So how did Mr. Shepard know where Tom Kline was living? We didn't hear any testimony that Mr. Shepard followed him home. We didn't hear testimony that he stopped. Members of the jury, what we heard is that Tom Kline's name is not on any public record. Not for his business, not for his house, nothing. It doesn't make any sense. Think about the time frame that the government is asking you to believe that this happened in. 12 hours between when Mr. Shepard saw Mr. Kline and when Mr. Kline died. In that 12 hours, Mr. Shepard is supposed to have outsmarted the Federal Witness Protection Agency? Doesn't make sense. And this wasn't 12 hours of Mr. Shepard sitting in front of a computer. You heard from Miss Shepard. He was with his daughter, going to lunch, going to ice cream, going to an hours-long college tour, walking around, going to dinner, and then going to sleep. When did Mr. Shepard have time to find out where Mr. Kline lived? He didn't. Now, members of the jury, there's something else in the government's case that just doesn't sit right. They're telling you that Mr. Shepard killed Tom Kline because of something he testified about in 2018, specifically about the family, that Mr. Shepard cares about his family. So when Mr. Shepard would have woken up, according to the government's timeline, to go kill Tom Kline, he would have noticed something that was pretty important. His daughter missing. The government wants you to believe that Mr. Shepard, who loves his family so much that he would kill for his nephew, wouldn't so much as search for his daughter, call her, text her, nothing. They want you to believe that all of this is motivated by family, but the family that he's closest to isn't there and he doesn't say anything? That doesn't make sense. Members of the jury, when Lauren Shepard went out on June 25th, 2021, her father was sleeping. And when she got back, her father was still sleeping. In fact, the first time he even knows that Miss Shepard left the house was in trial today. because while Augie Shepard slept, someone else stole. That's why, members of the jury, I'm asking that you find Mr. Shepard not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any rebuttal time?
Yes,
saved?
Your Honor. Your Honor, members of the jury, Barry Capello saw it coming, and he couldn't stop it. Mr. Capello told us what happened to him. We just have to believe him. When he saw Augie Shepard, he was scared for his life. Now, the defense wants you to believe that this was just a random burglary. A random run-of-the-mill burglar decided instead of running away, he was going to strangle a man he did not know with jumper cables. If he was thinking so fast, why wouldn't he just run? Nothing was found stolen from Mr. Kline's vehicle. Nothing. This person even left the jumper cables. It was no burglar. There was nothing reported stolen. But there are 4 unaccounted for hours from Augie Shepard's night. Now, the defense told you that he was sleeping when his daughter left, but how do we know that? How do we know that he wasn't just lying down? His daughter leaves, he sees her go with her friend, and he has the perfect opportunity. 4 hours of free time. 4 years of anger driving him to find Mr. Kline. Members of the jury, we know that he did. This burglar was driving a sports car, a dark-colored sports car that matches exactly with Mr. Shepard's. It's no coincidence, members of the jury. Mr. Shepard killed Barry Capello, and he did it to retaliate because he testified. That's clear from trial today. Find him guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and give our judges a minute to finish up their ballots, and if you guys could let me know when you get the confirmation, and then we can do brief comments and